Now on Money Talk 1010 AM, it's the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan and Roxanne Wilder are discussing everything from world, national, and local issues to information from the unknown. And since Morgan's an attorney, there'll probably be a little something from the law. Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, hello there, guys. Busy weekend for everybody. I know you two were up to some trouble.
No,
never.
We weren't up to trouble.
Gotcha.
Unless you call a lot of walking, which was a lot of trouble.
We did do some walking.
In the heat on that pavement, and went to an art show, and we couldn't afford any of it, but we sure looked at it. It sure looked pretty.
That's fun. I went out of town a little bit this weekend. I went down to Miami.
Ooh.
And I went to opening day down there, so that was a good time. And they've made a lot of changes at Marlin Stadium. It is really, really nice. I know Tampa Bay Rays fans don't want to hear me talk about Marlin Stadium and how great that is when we have the Trop. But something really good that's going on at the Trop is they're continuing this special this year when, not special, but if somebody catches a home run ball, a fan does, and they don't do this anywhere else, you get that ball and you're allowed to get it autographed after the game by the player who hit it.
Nice.
That's really
That's
cool.
real nice.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent.
Great idea.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear you weren't at the Ultra Music Festival down there in Miami.
Oh, that's down there this weekend, too. Oh, yeah, I heard about that. There's a lot going on in Miami, you could tell.
Apparently, there were about 70,000 people stranded on an island.
I mean,
did you hear about that?
No.
Oh, yeah, that was the big deal. At the end of the music festival, I guess they didn't have the shuttle bus system to get all the people back off the island properly.
What island was it on? Star?
You would know better than me. I don't go down there enough.
Okay.
This is
new information, Morgan. Let me get into this.
Yeah,
okay.
you need to check that out because they said there were like 70,000 people walking 3 miles back across the bridge, I guess back across Biscayne Bay, to get back to Miami proper so they could go home.
And they're probably all inebriated?
Oh, well, something, right? So one would think. I mean, isn't that kind of what the Ultra Music Festival is all about?
And what time was this?
Wasn't it like 3 o'clock in the morning?
That's what I'm saying.
When the rave is over.
Oh, no.
Oh, man. If there's no transportation.
That's no fun.
And probably there were a lot of stops that had to be made in people's yards.
Well, as you're walking back across the bridge, I mean, just imagine where in the world would you stop? Where would you stop? So,
what a disaster.
Yeah, tell me about it. Aren't you glad you didn't get stuck in that?
It's compared to the Fry Festival. Remember the Fry Festival?
Yes.
Did we talk about that? That took place on an island somewhere. It's the festival
or
that never
didn't
really
take
happened.
place.
Right. So, oh my gosh, that's crazy.
I watched that whole documentary on that. That was amazing. That was going to be a failure in the beginning, and people tried to tell those people that it wasn't going to work.
Right.
And I saw that coming, and I said, "This is just going to be," and it was.
Didn't they get in some trouble for that, for like defrauding people?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because they took
did.
a lot of money from people. I don't remember all the details.
Promised all this beautiful accommodations, and when they got there was nothing.
Pick your own palm tree.
And these weren't poor people that were showing up at that. So they were influential people that could sue.
They got sold a bill of goods.
Virginia Key, guys, that's where it took place. Virginia Key. So they had to walk back across the Rick Baker Causeway back to Miami.
I wonder if that'll have any bearing on the Final Four, because isn't Virginia in the Final Four? So I don't know.
I know Duke's
I don't know. Stay away from Virginia. I don't know. I can't read the stars, but I try to read the tea leaves occasionally. I wanted to just take a quick look back this week at something that, I think people are probably getting a little bit tired of us talking about the Hillary Clinton email scandal. I mean, that's one that's just been around forever. But folks understand there was no
resolution.
There was no resolution. There was no comeuppance. There was no punishment to somebody obviously being treated differently from the way that everybody else in this country would get treated under similar circumstances. So one of our favorite groups out there is Judicial Watch, and they're a 501c3 based out of Washington, D.C., run by Tom Fitton, and they are always pursuing the fight. They don't give up. And that's one of the things that I love about Judicial Watch is they just keep going. They're like the Energizer Bunny of conservative legal organizations. Now, remember, they're the ones whose work even led us to find out about Hillary Clinton's separate email address. I believe it was hrc@clintonemail.com. And that came out through Judicial Watch's work that email address existed. And that's what broke open the whole knowledge of the fact that she had this secret server. But for that, we never would have even known about this shenanigans, this scam that she pulled. But remember how she had what she claimed were 55,000 pages of work-related emails, and she turned all of those over allegedly to the State Department. And then she had between 30 and 35,000 pages of yoga emails and wedding invites, what she deemed to be personal. You remember all that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, guess what? Judicial Watch has been recovering and going through some of these personal emails, and lo and behold, they're finding 756 pages of new work-related emails that weren't included in what she turned over to the State Department, but were included in the 30,000 pages that she destroyed with her bleach bit system. Remember when she wiped it with a cloth? Remember that? Mm. And among those emails that they're finding are several emails that were classified when sent and received, and they were transmitted over her own private email server. And, of course, when we pair that up with the knowledge that we got out of the congressional investigations last summer when they were interviewing Peter Strzok on Capitol Hill, and if you remember, Congressman Louis Gohmert asked him basically about the fact that a foreign power had received a copy of every email sent and received from Hillary Clinton's private server. Now, at the time, we were somewhat concerned not knowing who that foreign power was, but it's since come out that that was China. Mm-hmm. This is an acknowledged fact that China actually got a copy of all of Hillary Clinton's emails the second that they were sent or received, including all of these emails with classified information in it. So when you want to look at somebody who's culpable, somebody about whom we have evidence of breaking federal law, and we're not just talking about the classified nature of some of the materials that were on her server, I'm talking about just the Federal Records Act. And the Federal Records Act says you can't keep a federal record outside the system. You can't maintain that at your house. In other words, we can't have the records for the Secretary of State maintained at Morgan Streetman's house. They have to be maintained by the federal government. Why? Because all of the people have the right to access them. And when one of all of the people wants to access them, what do? They file a FOIA request. Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. They file a FOIA request. Well, guess what? If those records are at Morgan Streetman's house, when the government goes to search for records that are responsive to the FOIA request, they won't find them because those records are at my house, right? Mm-hmm. That was the scam she was pulling. It is plain as day under the law. Forget the classified information part of it. The whole reason she did this, it wasn't to, well, there may have been some reasons to let the classified information out, but that's a very conspiratorial way of looking at it, that she was secretly maybe getting funds from the Chinese and, oh, well, I'll just leave my server sort of unsecured, and, hey, if you happen to catch a peek at it, well, who's, no harm, no foul, right? You guys can basically look at my stuff here. Now, that's a very conspiratorial way of looking at it. What I was trying to get at, the way that I'm looking at it, is merely that she made the determination early on, I don't want to have to be responsive to FOIA requests. I don't want to be responsive to the Judicial Watch requests that I know are coming. And so she thought, well, what's the easiest way to do that? Never let the records enter the federal system. Keep them separate. Keep them on my own. Nobody will know about them. And so when they go to search for them, they just won't even search through my emails. And that's what she did. And remember, she pulled that off for years. This went on, this scam that she was pulling. And nobody, even in the federal government, people who allegedly knew about it, which includes a lot of the people in the Obama administration, by the way, who were emailing back and forth with her. And it becomes apparent that they did know that there was at least some issue with this. Of course, we have to remember President Obama had his own little secret email, too, and maybe even more than one. But we know about at least one of them that he was using to conduct federal government business outside the prying eyes of the public. And that's wrong. And so, folks, because we're going to talk some more this week about the Bob Mueller report and all of the outcome of all of that. But as we do it, let's remember in context that we've got a great example of somebody about whom we do have a lot of evidence that they violated federal laws, many different federal laws. We have a lot of evidence about what Hillary Clinton did, and yet she is not prosecuted. And apparently they've got no evidence about what Donald Trump did, but we just went through a 2-year witch hunt on him. So we got a lot more to cover. We're going to talk to you a little bit about Uncle Joe Biden, everybody, America's favorite uncle. That's right. Don't leave your kids with him, folks. And we say that jokingly, but you know what? That's not even us saying it. And that's some of what we're going to share with you. This is well known in D.C. circles.
A lot of photographs to look at.
Oh, boy. Just watch some of these videos. I mean, Joe is known for nuzzling up to your wife, so don't turn your back on old Uncle Joe. He'll get around behind her and nuzzle right in on the back of her head.
He likes the smell of shampoo.
Something like that, Pat George. We'll keep on spiking the football when we come back, but we're going to hit some really interesting stuff on the Mueller report. We're going to tell you a little bit about this historic flooding, and then when we go out there, we're going to tell you some stuff you haven't heard before on the Morgan Streetman Show.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just nuzzling, just kind of getting behind Morgan, getting in his
She
personal
was
space.
smelling my hair.
Oh, that was too
I
much
tell
fun.
you what, you got to watch it around here at Money Talk.
Just
Might have
as
to
long as you're
rename
not
this.
doing that, Morgan.
I tell you, I mean, we might have to rename the studio here. The Love Boat.
It is really interesting. I know, because everybody has their own definition of what makes them feel comfortable or uncomfortable.
Right. Personal space.
Even if I sit next to someone in a meeting, like there's one particular meeting I have to do here at work, and I always sit next to someone it's like a little love seat in somebody's office. And I sit next to him and I feel bad. I'm like, I hope he doesn't think I'm standoffish or trying to get away from him. But I literally slink over the left side of the seat so that I'm not all in his space.
Right.
And so I think people have different opinions about what's important to them when it comes to that.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, I sort of like my personal space. Mm-hmm. And I know...
Culturally, it differs
culturally,
too.
right. There are some cultures where you don't get any personal space. I remember when I was over in London, Pat George, to bring back to mind a story that we've told on the air before, not at Speaker's Corner, though, but just walking around London and viewing some of the different sites. And of course, this was back in the early 90s. I can remember the Chinese tourists that were there had a very different idea of personal space than what I was used to. They would literally be like climbing on you, and like leaning on you, pushing, very different from what we were used to here in the U.S. And that was kind of a little bit of a cultural shock to me in a way.
I don't think they mean to do that. I think they're just so used to doing that because it's so populated.
Well, that's what I mean.
It is
And for
heavily
them,
populated.
they have a different idea of what you're entitled to or what you should think is your personal space, and they just have a much lower level of personal space. They're much more used to people invading your space or
Close quarters.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at some of the Middle Eastern cultures that are very touchy, and even men holding hands and things like that we don't do over here. But as we think about this Joe Biden story, because what we're talking about here is that Joe Biden apparently, and this is coming out now that he's, I guess, potentially making a move to run for president, but he'd gone out to Nevada to support Nevada Assemblywoman Lucy Flores in her campaign to become lieutenant governor of Nevada. And this is back in 2014, so at a rally in 2014. And as she describes it, he basically got up behind her and nuzzled in the back of her head with his mouth and nose, kind of inhaled her hair, and kind of maybe worked her shoulders like a little bit of a shoulder massage.
And if you can feel someone's breath on you,
Yeah.
if you can physically feel their breath,
Right.
that's too close.
That's pretty intimate. That's pretty. And Roxanne, we were talking even earlier about the show, just about, we're pretty good friends, but I mean, it'd be pretty, I can't imagine the scenario where I'm coming up behind you, like, kind of like grabbing your shoulders and nuzzling in your head. I mean, like, that would just strike me as being inappropriate.
Well, what about you, and then ending it with a kiss on the back of her head?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, we're actually good friends. I didn't just come and meet Roxanne for a political rally to help her out. I mean, we actually know each other pretty well, been to each other's house and stuff. So, but, Pat George, we could change this up a little bit. And I was kind of playing around with these concepts yesterday, thinking, how do we bring this home for people? We could change this up. How about me and you, Pat George? I mean, I would, I love you to death, but I'd feel very uncomfortable if you walked up behind me, put your arms around me, and started nuzzling in on the back of my head.
Well, that will not be happening. But again, every time we say goodbye, you say goodbye at the end of the show and walk down the hall. I mean, would you not feel awkward if she turned around and you just kissed her in the back of the head and said, goodbye?
Well, this is not lost on anybody.
See?
I mean, the entirety of Washington, D.C. knows about this, and believe me, there are videos of this kind of behavior because apparently even at the same rally, and you've got a picture of that, he got in on Eva Longoria. Is it Ava or Eva?
Eva.
Eva Longoria. And he was
Eva and Evan Longoria, the baseball player.
Okay.
Eva Longoria, the actress.
All right. Well, he was nuzzling in on her, too, which, I mean, you can't, you could sort of understand that. She's extremely beautiful.
Right.
Lucy Flores is a great-looking lady. But anyway, Uncle Joe, you got to stop this stuff. You got to keep your hands to yourself at the family parties. You know what I mean? You're too old. Those days have passed. But I loved what Kellyanne Conway said about him.
If anybody just types in creepy Uncle Joe videos, you come up with a treasure trove.
So who said it best but Kellyanne Conway? You just go out there. If you want to see some of what we're talking about, type in creepy Uncle Joe, and you will come up with a treasure trove of videos.
How many people have done that?
Oh, I'm sure it's been thousands over the last several days. But, we've got to talk some more about this Mueller report, the principal conclusions of which came out last weekend. So they've been out a little over a week now that we've known about them. And I'll tell you, all last week, I don't know if you guys heard it, but watching the news and stuff, I tell you, almost to a one, the news media was saying, well, there's President Trump out there spiking the football. Did you hear that phrasing last week? Spiking the football in the end zone? You didn't hear that, Pat George?
Oh, no.
Okay, I heard that a bunch last week. So I thought that was, there's one of their talking points, that people are spiking the football in the end zone. But, I mean, excuse me, we've just gone through 2 years of a completely fabricated witch hunt that, I mean, the mainstream media was essentially breathless during the last 2 years. They couldn't even catch their breath. They were so up in arms about this witch hunt. I mean, and how true it was, and how there must have been some kind of Russian collusion or Russian conspiracy. So pardon me for now, after 2 years of nonsense, if we want to just talk about the truth for a couple of weeks, I don't think that's spiking the football. Something's got to be said. We've had 2 years of lies. Can't we get a couple of weeks of truth? Can't we talk about it for a couple of weeks and talk about what really happened here? I mean,
this is beyond a follow-up to a story. This is, you've been reporting the story this one particular way, and now we found out it's not that way.
Right. And dribs and drabs of information have come out. So, I mean, within the last 2 months, we've learned, because Doug Collins was good enough to just simply publish the testimony, which is Lisa Page's closed-door testimony up on Capitol Hill to Congress. But we've learned that what we thought about that text message talking about the insurance policy, that everything that you thought about that was exactly right, that this Russia investigation was the insurance policy. Lisa Page says that. So we now know exactly what was going on with these people. And for 2 years, they've kind of like done the whole, wink, wink, nah. They've played coy. Oh, sorry, we can't talk about that. That's part of an ongoing investigation, et cetera, et cetera. And now when we finally find out the truth, we say, wait a minute. You guys have been lying to us for years. They go, wait, what are you doing? Move on. Time to move on. It's time to move on. New story. Quit spiking the football. And if you want to know how serious this is, I mean, I want you to listen to this, because this is something that John Brennan was just, John Brennan, former CIA director, former chief of station in Saudi Arabia. Some question whether he's a Muslim or not. We've had stories on that before. But leaving that part aside, one thing I know for sure that he was gung-ho anti-Trump, and he was gung-ho all about this collusion stuff. Now, I want to play something. This is less than a month ago. Okay, today's April Fool's Day, but this is no joke. Less than a month ago, this is John Brennan on, I believe it's Lawrence O'Donnell, Last Word on MSNBC. Now, this is March 5th, 2019. Let's hear what he says about the indictments that are about to come down the pike.
I think Robert Mueller wants to be able to conclude his work and turn over the investigative threads to the Southern District of New York, the Eastern District of Virginia, and other jurisdictions as appropriate, as we're coming up to 2 years. So I think he does want to conclude that. I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, this week on Friday, not knowing anything about it, but Friday is the day that the grand jury indictments come down. And also this Friday is better than next Friday because next Friday is the 15th of March, which is the Ides of March. And I don't think Robert Mueller will want to have that dramatic flair of the Ides of March when he is going to be delivering what I think are going to be his indictments, the final indictments, as well as the report that he gives to the Attorney General.
So John Brennan says he really doesn't, he doesn't have any special knowledge, right, except for that he basically helped to start this investigation. He's the former CIA director, and he kind of goes around claiming that he's got some kind of special knowledge or special access, unless you put him on the spot and you ask him. But I'll tell you, the media just let him run wild. I mean, this is less than a month ago, and if you want to watch the full interview, you can go out there and find it. He's talking about there being indictments of the Trump family coming down, and that they're going to be March 8th, right? March 8th. But we know there were no indictments whatsoever. Now, let's listen to the way that Lawrence O'Donnell treats him, because this is the way the media handled this whole story. And I want you to hear this. There's a definite bolstering of John Brennan's story. So let's hear it.
So, again, I don't have any inside knowledge. I'm not talking with anybody in special counsel.
Yes, you do. You have the inside knowledge.
But not about the status of the investigation right now.
Yeah.
But I do think also if anybody from the Trump family, an extended family, is going to be indicted, it would be in the final act of Mueller's investigation, because Bob Mueller, and I think his team, knows that if he were to do something, indicting a Trump family member, or if he were to go forward with indictment on criminal conspiracy involving U.S. persons, that would basically be the death knell of the special counsel's office, because I don't believe that Donald Trump would allow Bob Mueller to continue in the aftermath of those types of actions.
That's just all made up. It's all made up. And here you've got one of the lead anchors on the station, Lawrence O'Donnell, saying you do have special knowledge, Mr. Brennan. You do have insider information. You do know what you're talking about. But what's the truth, folks? He didn't, and he didn't, and he didn't. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. They do a really poor job, as we've been saying over and over in the media, when you do a story, coming back and saying, you know what, we were wrong about this. Mm-hmm. Even if it's something unrelated to politics or Trump in this instance, if there's an article written and there are things that are erroneous, then, it's updated and it says a little line. But what's done is done sometimes, because not everybody's going to go back and read the corrected information.
Right. A lot of times it is just the headlines. And, of course, that's what we've been getting now for 2 years. I mean, we've been getting 2 years of incorrect headlines, and then they think they can do like a 1 week quasi-retraction. But the thing is, like you say, they don't even want to retract. They don't even want to admit that they did anything wrong. Our Out There segment last week was about this witch hunt that went on for 2 years. 2 years of lies, 2 years of a fraud, or what the president calls a phony and fraudulent investigation. And it was just amazing to me that they pulled this off, that for 2 years straight they were able to so convincingly lie to so many people. And, of course, I'd say about half the country bought it.
Can you imagine if they get their hands on the report, that they will find every little thing with a fine-tooth comb?
Oh, sure.
That says, Mueller was wrong, here is evidence, here's proof, and it'll never end for 400 years.
Right. It will never, right, exactly.
No. It'll be horrible.
I mean, Mueller is the guy they picked to make this judgment. He made the judgment on Russian conspiracy, and these guys with the whole, if you listen to enough audio clips of Clapper and Brennan and these others, you'll hear what a joke it is. And I didn't isolate this part of it because, the truth of the matter is I had, about 35 minutes of audio I could share with you, and it is all relevant. But I'm trying to get down to just the nub of some things for you so we can keep you interested in the show as opposed to just listening to these guys drone on and on and on. But if you listen to them, you find out that at the end of the day, they were pushing this And now they all want to say, oh, well, you know what? We never even said that Bob Mueller was going to make a determination, or we never said that, we never really thought anything was going to come of the Mueller report. And now this is really all supposed to be the congressional investigations after the fact. So the Mueller report's kind of the precursor, and now we'll move into phase 2 and so on and so forth. But they never want to just stop for a minute, because now that phase 1 is ending, shouldn't we have a little bit of a, shouldn't we have a sit down and talk about this, a debrief of what happened here? Because maybe we shouldn't go to phase 2. Maybe we shouldn't go to phase 2. Maybe people need to just drop this and move on. But I'll tell you, unless they will admit that they did something wrong to begin with, that's the first step for making a change, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You have to first admit that you got a problem. And they don't want to do that.
No.
The media doesn't want to admit it has a problem. Let's hear from one of our favorites. And I say that sarcastically. One of our favorites, Jake Tapper, on CNN. And let's hear him defend his network. Folks, you'll love this.
But I'm not sure what you're saying the media got wrong. But the media reported what the investigation was going on. Other than the people in the media on the left, not on this network, I don't know anybody who got anything wrong. We didn't say that there was conspiracy. We said that Mueller was investigating conspiracy.
We didn't actually say there were. No, you guys misunderstood us for the last 2 years. We haven't been on here saying that the whole Trump family is about to get indicted in 3 days. Or we haven't said that there was obvious evidence of Russian conspiracy. We haven't played Adam Schiff where he's saying that he's got plenty of evidence, what he's seen. Because remember, he gets to see stuff that you and I, normal people, we don't get to see, supposedly. And he's saying, well, I've seen the collusion or conspiracy or whatever word we want to use. And that was something I wanted to talk about earlier, and I kind of got off track. But, it was this idea that collusion is not a word that we use. I looked the word collusion up just because I'm like, was this just invented in like the 1970s or something? And no, sure enough, it goes back to the 1300s. You know what I mean? Guys, this is an English word. It means for people to get together and do something secretly that's not legal. It's very similar to the definition of conspiracy. Scheming, which is the way that the media has been using it. And you hear these guys themselves will even use the word collusion when you're not looking. So I love it when they tell us, when you ask them a question and their answer is always to kind of deflect, and we're going to get to an example of this, believe me, because I have one for you, but to deflect like, I don't know what word that means, collusion. And then the same guy in a different part of the same interview will use the word. And we've heard that before on here. We've highlighted that kind of thing. Like, you hypocrite. You guys are such a bunch of hypocrites. And it's for this very reason that I think that people, and I really hope that the president sticks with this, because I think the president's pretty incensed about what went on here. And I hope he sticks. I hope that anger doesn't fade away, because I'll tell you, after a big battle, there's an instinct among good people to want to move on and to be magnanimous and to let bygones be bygones. He won the big battle. He won the 2-year witch hunt. The truth won, really. That's what won. He didn't win. It's just the truth came out. But, he's basically being cleared, and I suspect that none of these other investigations are going to wind up having any legs. So he's basically won, and there might be an impetus to just move on. But I think that's the impetus that he had after he won the election, and I think he's got to learn from that. What was their response when he tried to just move on? He tried to not prosecute Hillary. He tried to just move on, and what did they do? They didn't move on. They turned it into a witch hunt against him. So I hope that he's upset enough and sticks with this enough to actually pursue some of what went on, because I think we need to get to the bottom of what happened here. And I think that if Congress wants to investigate something, they ought to be calling in the people that set up this insurance policy, that set up this witch hunt, this Russian conspiracy, false narrative. They ought to be pulling those people into Congress and finding out what did they know and when did they know it. Because the truth is, they all knew this was false. They knew this was made up. And that's what you see in Peter Strzok's own text messages, where he says to his lover girl, Lisa Page, that he doesn't want to necessarily be involved in the Mueller investigation because of his belief that there's no there there. Remember that phrasing, that there's no big there there? Mm-hmm. Well, that's because he was the guy that initiated the investigation. He knew that it was based on a false premise. He knew it was all made up. And so he knew that the most likely outcome was that it was going to blow up in all of their faces, not that they were going to find conspiracy or collusion or some other beautiful career-making outcome. But let's hear what Sarah Sanders had to say to the press pool about who ought to be investigated.
If Congress is so gung-ho to call people up to the Hill, the list I would start with are Comey, Clapper, Brennan, and other people in the FBI who perpetuated this absurd lie and this absurd idea that the President of the United States was somehow a foreign agent and colluding with another government.
And it really was absurd. It was completely absurd. And they don't have a shred, not a shred of evidence that it was the case. All this speculation for 2 years straight. And I mean, we could fill up 35, 40 minutes of audio clips of different experts on various networks saying that somehow President Trump is beholden to Vladimir Putin in one way or another, or perhaps Vladimir Putin is his handler in an intelligence operation.
And you know what's happening right now as we speak? The foreign influence as far as getting security clearance of the White House vetoed and overruled people that weren't supposed to get the security clearance. Dozens of people now, they say, are in the White House that should not have got
this.
it's happening right now. It's all over Twitter. It's all over the news. So how many days are we going to hear this? They're moving on to the next thing, that Trump is not American.
Trump's not doing something right. He's selling the country out somehow.
Another punch.
That's right. If one thing doesn't work, switch to the next one.
That's all we're going to hear.
But
all
folks,
about the security.
that wasn't an issue before when we were just talking about the Russians. That wasn't an issue.
Thank you. And we need to be a little bit more sophisticated consumers of news and information. And we need to say to ourselves, hey, I remember you guys just lied to me for 2 years straight. You've been lying to me. And then you got Jake Tapper coming out and saying, like, well, we didn't do anything wrong. We were just reporting the facts as we knew them. Or some other nonsense, some other excuse like that. I mean, are you kidding me? Why don't you just own your own behavior? You know what I mean? Why don't you be adult enough to just say, you know what, you're right. That's what we did. We tried to put that forward. But that's not what they want to do. I want you to hear what James Clapper has to say in response to Sarah Sanders calling on them to be investigated. And here's where you'll hear him, do the little initial condescension about collusion not being a proper word or something. Let's hear from our favorite James Clapper now.
Well, first, I wonder if she was conflating or confusing collusion, whatever that is, with the Russian interference. And certainly those of us that she named, John Brennan and Jim Comey and I, are part of the group that were tasked by President Obama to put together all the reporting we had on the Russian interference, and which we did. President Obama directly and personally confronted Putin about the Russian interference in September and did not accept at face value Putin's protestations.
Yeah, same guy who leaned over Dmitry Medvedev and said, wait till after the election, I'll have more flexibility domestically. These guys are such a joke. But what I really wanted...
That guy sounded to me like he was just trying to use a lot of really big words just so people would just say, I'm not interested in what he has to say. He's too boring.
Right. He reminded me of like the Swedish chef. Swedish chef from, was it What was it? Yeah.
Sesame Street, right.
Yeah, Sesame Street.
Or the Muppets, I'm sorry.
Muppets, Sesame Street,
the
Fraggle
Muppets.
Rock. One of those Jim Henson things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It was too long ago, but I remember somebody sounding like that. But yeah, could you sound any more goofy? But in all seriousness, one of the reasons I wanted to play that clip was, did you catch him pointing the finger at President Obama there? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know if that slipped by the rest of you. Of course, he's done this. Clapper's done this once before because we've talked about it here on this show. And I searched for that clip. I just couldn't locate it again. But he has done that before. He's pointed the finger at President Obama, and I think that's exactly what he was doing in that clip right there. He said President Obama's the one that told us to pull all this stuff together, and we did it. So I would like to see where this ends. I certainly hope it doesn't fizzle out and we don't just let bygones be bygones and we don't just all move on with things, because I think that would be a real shame given what's happened over the past 2 years. But, I mean, we need to know how far up the chain this went. It sounds like it went all the way to the top, to President Obama. and that this was an intelligence operation conducted by political interests, one political party and a group of politicians against another political party and a candidate and then president of that political party. That's what really happened here. And I don't know how we define that. I think there's been a lot of words that have been thrown around the last couple of years pretty flippantly and maybe misused. But at some point, we are approaching the idea of a treason when we're talking about trying to unseat a sitting, duly elected president by any means possible. That certainly undermines our democracy, which is what they claim that Trump has been trying to do. We're going to tell you about some interesting stuff when we come back.
Oh, we have deep philosophical conversations during the break, too. We get those in.
I tell you what, we ought to record those, and then that could be like a special podcast after the fact.
There could be teasers for after the
I am
podcast.
recording those, and I sell
I know.
that.
We could call it the nuzzle.
I can record us.
The nuzzle.
Uh-huh. Well, where are we going out there today, Morgan?
Ooh, I tell you what, have you guys heard there have been 2 pretty big assassination attempts in the past 3 or 4 months? Yeah, I know, Pat George. You hadn't heard of it, have you?
To who?
Well, the president.
Oh.
The president.
I'm not. No.
Yes.
April Fools.
No, I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. In fact, there's one that we've been holding, which was a guy. I almost said gentleman, but I got to not use gentleman when we're talking about a terrorist.
I can't find anything about this.
Yeah, you won't. Mm-hmm. I know. And that's kind of in and of itself, in my opinion, is a little out there. Mm-hmm. That none of the mainstream media is covering these assassination plots. Now, the first one was back in January. Okay, and that was a guy from Georgia, from Cumming, Georgia. And he was basically going to go up and blow up buildings in Washington, D.C., including the White House and others. Okay, and he was stopped. But last week, and if you remember, if you watch the news a lot, which I happen to do, and I know you all do occasionally as well, but if you watch the news a lot last week, they were saying that now is the time we have to be somewhat concerned because with the end of the Mueller investigation and not being a positive outcome for people who are against President Trump, that we may see them kind of lose their minds a little bit and do some irrational things. I mean, that was some media messaging that came out last week, and I heard that repeatedly. Now, I don't know if that's actually the case or not. I mean, I suppose there is some sense to that. But here's example 1 of that phenomenon, supposedly. And this happened Wednesday of last week. And again, I don't think you guys heard about this, but this was over in West Virginia. There was a man driving on Interstate 68, and he was traveling at a very high rate of speed, which is about 130 miles per hour, when he was spotted by the West Virginia trooper who pulled him over. And then proceeded to ask him where he was going in such a hurry. And the gentleman, again, I shouldn't use that word, the guy, the man, his name was Eric Charon, 42 years old, of Kansas City, Missouri. He said he was going to have dinner with the president. Okay, so and he was running a little bit late, thus the speed. Now, the trooper was able to ascertain from questioning him that he had been traveling for 13 hours straight without even so much as a bathroom break. He was hauling tail from Kansas City, Missouri, direct to Washington, D.C. Now, how did he know that President Trump had invited him to dinner, one might wonder? Well, never fear. The voices in his head told him so. And he also was then asked, did he have a firearm with him by the trooper? Yeah, he had a firearm. Any ammunition? Yeah, he had a little bit of ammunition. And how about, sir, do you have any explosives in the car with you? You know what his answer was? You got to love this answer. This is one that the trooper loves to hear, by the way. Not very much. I've only got a small amount for a bomb in the back.
Not very much.
Oh, me. Well, this guy's obviously got some real issues. One of them apparently being a pretty serious drug addiction, I'm guessing. And, of course, he admitted to this.
How old was this guy?
42 years old. 42 years old. Now, what's interesting is that he is, as I was reading the story, I was kind of going, this guy, but for this, what he did here, he could almost have been a guest on the Out There segment, because he had apparently written some pretty crazy stuff in a little handwritten journal that he had that they found in the trunk, which talked about subjects ranging from time travel to levitation and mythical creatures such as the chupacabra. So I'm like, this guy, he's probably a very interesting dinner party guest. But for his severe methamphetamine addiction, which he does acknowledge that he's got a methamphetamine addiction that's out of control and has been for a couple of years now. And, there's some indication that could be some basis for some of the voices that he's hearing in his head, right? But, of course, I'm thinking back to some of our other Out There segments, and I'm thinking about how we know that the technology's out there now. We know that the technology existed in the 70s for them to implant something into your sinus cavity that could make you hear voices in your head. Well, that's pretty difficult because that would involve a surgery and everything else. So, maybe somebody would know about that if you pulled that shenanigan on them. But then we've talked about how they've developed technology where they can actually make you hear sounds with electromagnetic radiation beamed at you. And they can make it to where it's specific to you where you're standing. Remember how we talked about that in the Out There? So could they beam into your head and tell you, hey, President Trump's inviting you to dinner or something like that? I don't know. Probably not. Guys, probably just crazy. But as we begin to talk about these guys, I mean, the ones that really strike me as odd are the ones with a lot of mental issues and a lot of kind of strange thoughts. And then who wind up getting messages from somewhere, messages to go and do things. Another thing that strikes me as particularly strange about this particular guy is that, what his bond was? They set his bond at?
I bet very low.
$10,000.
That's really strange.
Are you kidding me?
I knew it.
The guy was on the way to go have dinner with the president, and he had a bomb and firearm and ammo, and you're setting his bail at $10,000? I mean, do you want him to get out? Let's talk back about the man coming up from Georgia, because this was another plot that you didn't hear about, right? Now, this guy's name was Hasher Taheb. I'm going to give you a couple of guesses as to what his cultural religious persuasion was. And let's just say that his particular plot involved targeting the White House and other government buildings with a homemade bomb that he'd made, and also he had acquired an anti-tank rocket. I mean, where do you get one of those? I mean, that's not something you can get at the flea market, last time I checked. An anti-tank rocket? This guy's 21 years old, lives in Georgia, and his name's Hasher Taheb. Where's he buying an anti-tank rocket? Well, when the FBI got a hold of him, he said he was headed to Hydra. And I wonder if you remember that, Hydra. No? Sort of, maybe? Well, in the article here, in the paper, it says that refers to Islamic State-controlled territory, and I suppose that that's right. But it also refers, if you remember, to a mosque in Falls Church, Virginia, called Dar al-Hijra, that we've talked about before. We've had guests on, including Chris Gobatz, who went undercover at that mosque back in, I think it was about 2007, and uncovered the fact that mosque is a front for the terrorist organization Hamas. So when you're talking about this guy was headed up from Georgia to Virginia, and he claims he's going to Hydra, and of course the FBI and the paper say, oh, that's Islamic State-controlled territory. Well, maybe it's the Dar al-Hijra Mosque in Falls Church. And that's a little out there. Folks, I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.